The night smelled of gasoline and rain. Turin, 1996, a city where the old world was dying and the new one was built on money, betrayal, and fear. Factories stood silent, their iron hearts rusted out after decades of work. In the shadows of the industrial ruins, men like Marco Bellini learned to survive not by rules, but by instinct. He wasn't a criminal by nature, he was a soldier once, a demolition expert who had served in Bosnia, who had seen the price of loyalty. But when the war ended, loyalty meant nothing. The country forgot its heroes, and men like Marco were left behind, living on small jobs, small lies, and a growing hunger for one big score that would change everything. That chance came in the form of a whisper, a train loaded with gold bars, quietly leaving the Italian National Bank, headed for a private vault near Milan. No guards on board, just sensors, metal, and timing. A perfect job if executed with precision. He brought together a team of misfits and outcasts. Sergio the Ghost Romano, a mechanic who could rebuild an engine blindfolded Elena Viri, the mastermind hacker who once worked for the police Riccardo, a street racer who dreamed of speed and freedom. But among them was someone else, someone who would sail them out before dawn. The plan was flawless. The betrayal wasn't. In a single night, their world would collapse, not from bullets, but from trust breaking apart like glass. The chase that followed would burn through the streets of Turin, across bridges and tunnels, through loyalty, greed, and blood. And when the smoke cleared, one truth would remain: no one steals gold without paying the price for it. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It washed the grime from the rooftops of Turin, but it could not cleanse the city itself. The streets gleamed under the yellow glow of the lamps, slick with oil, cigarette butts, and the ghosts of promises long forgotten. Marco Bellini sat in his old Fiat Tipo, parked beneath a cracked viaduct, the wipers screeching across the glass like dull knives. He had been waiting there for almost an hour, staring at the time glowing faintly on his wristwatch, 20 to 47. In the distance, the hum of the city rolled like thunder. Somewhere, a police siren wailed and then fell silent again. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, the same tired face, unshaven, the same eyes that had seen too much war and too little peace. The last of his cigarette glowed in the dark, a dying ember that matched the rhythm of his thoughts. He wasn't here for nostalgia. He was here for a meeting. A black BMW appeared from the rain, its headlights slicing through the mist. Marco watched as it slowed and stopped beside him. The passenger door opened, and a woman stepped out, Elena Viri. She wore a leather jacket and a look that could burn steel. She closed the door with care, as if silence itself were currency. "Bellini," she said, voice low, eyes sharp. "You're late." "I'm always late," he replied, lighting another cigarette. "That's how I stay alive." Elena smirked, walked around, and leaned against the hood of his car. "You heard the rumor, didn't you?" she said. "A train. No guards. Just gold." "I hear a lot of rumors," Marco said. "Most of them end in prison." "This one ends in Milan," she said softly, "with 40 million euros in gold bars. Government shipment. No military escort, just motion sensors and timing. That's all." He turned to face her, smoke curling between them like a secret. "And what makes you think I'm still interested in that kind of work?" "You're still breathing," she said. "That's reason enough." For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence. Marco thought of Bosnia, of the sound of mortars, of the taste of mud, of men dying for things that never mattered. Had promised himself that after the war, he would never touch explosives again. But promises were fragile things in his world. "What's the catch?" he asked finally. "There's always a catch," Elena replied. "The train leaves at midnight, next Thursday, from the Turin loading yard. It's heading north to a private vault near Milan, supposedly for reallocation. Only a handful of people know. One of them wants it gone, and is willing to pay us 15%. 15? Marco laughed bitterly. "For the risk of being shot, arrested, or erased. Generous." "You'll take it," she said. "You always do." He didn't deny it. A flash of lightning tore across the sky. Elena looked up, and for a second, the reflection of the storm danced in her eyes. Marco saw something there, not greed, but fear. "Who else knows?" he asked. "Only me, and the man financing it. Has ex-police. Calls himself Santo." Marco frowned. The name meant nothing, yet it carried weight. "And the team? They'll handle the tech. You handle the plan. Well, need a driver, a mechanic, and someone who knows how to disappear." Marco stubbed out his cigarette. "I know just the people." By the next morning, the rain had given way to mist. The city looked like it was exhaling after a long nightmare. Marco walked through the narrow alleys of San Salvario, past shuttered shops and graffiti that spoke of politics and broken dreams. He stopped at a garage where the sound of a compressor throbbed behind metal doors. He pushed them open. The air inside was thick with the smell of oil and gasoline. A man in grease-stained overalls looked up from beneath the hood of a car. Sergio the Ghost Romano. Bellini, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. You look like hell. Feels worse, Marco replied. I've got a job. Big one. Sergio raised an eyebrow. How big? Enough to start over. Or die trying. Exactly. They shared a look that said everything words couldn't. Sergio had been with him once before, back when things were simpler, or maybe just more desperate. Had lost everything after that job, except his tools and his bitterness. What's the target? Sergio asked. A train, Marco said. Sergio laughed. You're serious. Deadly. For a moment, Sergio stared at him, then shrugged. All right, I'm in. But if this goes south again, I'm blaming you. You always do, Marco said. By evening, they met Elena again in a small bar near the Po River. The place smelled of cheap wine and older regrets. A jukebox hummed quietly in the corner, playing a love song from the 70s. Marco laid out a map on the table, lines, circles, and arrows drawn in black ink. The train leaves here, he said, pointing to the industrial yard. It follows this route, through the tunnel outside the city, then west toward Rivoli, then north. We hit it before the first checkpoint. Fast and clean. Elena nodded. And the driver? Ricardo, Marco said. Best wheelman in Turin. She hesitated. Has reckless. Has alive, Marco replied. That's more than I can say for most. Elena leaned closer. You trust him? I don't trust anyone, Marco said. That's why I'm still here. For a while, they spoke only in fragments, timing, explosives, diversion routes. Every detail mattered. Every mistake could mean a bullet. When the bar closed, Elena touched his hand briefly. If this works, she said, we're ghosts. Number passed, no debts, no names. And if it doesn't, then we're already dead. Later that night, Marco returned to his small apartment overlooking the river. The lights of the city shimmered in the dark water, bending and breaking like gold dust under waves. He sat at his desk, the old one from his father's workshop, and stared at the blueprints of the train that Elena had given him. He traced the lines with a finger, the carriages, the compartments, the vault section where the gold would be kept. He could almost feel its weight, hear the clink of metal, smell the iron of greed. On the corner of the paper, Elena had scribbled a note, midnight. Precision is everything. He folded the paper slowly, tucked it into his jacket, and whispered to the empty room. Nothing is perfect, Elena. Nothing ever is. Outside, the rain began again. The fog clung to the streets like a veil of smoke. It was Thursday, 1 week before the heist, and the air in Turin felt heavier than usual, thick with the hum of things unsaid. In the half-light of dawn, Marco walked down via Madama Cristina, hands deep in his coat pockets, collar turned up against the cold. He didn't notice the woman watching him from across the street. Or maybe he did, but chose not to care. He turned the corner, entered a small cafe that opened earlier than most. The place was quiet, filled with the smell of bitter espresso and burnt sugar. An old man behind the counter nodded to him. Marco sat at the far table by the window. He never sat with his back to the door. Old habits. A few minutes later, Ricardo arrived, leather jacket, reckless grin, the kind of man who thrived on chaos. His eyes were bright with the same hunger Marco once had. You're early, Marco said, without looking up. Didn't sleep, Ricardo replied, sliding into the seat. Can't stop thinking about this job. It's madness. It's profit, Marco corrected. Madness is when you risk your life for nothing. Ricardo grinned. I heard about the gold train. People say it's cursed. Everyone who's tried to take it ended up in the river. Marco stirred his coffee, unfazed. Then we won't end up there. That's the spirit, Ricardo said, laughing. You know, I miss this. The rush, the tension, feels like the old days. There are no old days, Marco said quietly. Just days that didn't kill you. Before Ricardo could answer, Elena appeared, hair damp from the fog, a folder in her hand. Her expression unreadable. She dropped the folder on the table. Inside were blueprints, satellite photos, and coded access files. The train schedule's confirmed, she said. It departs at 07 next Thursday. Cargo marked as financial transfer restricted access. The vault car is protected by motion sensors, pressure plates, and a temperature lock. Open it wrong, and the internal alarm sends a signal directly to the finance ministry. Can we bypass it? Marco asked. Elena gave a small smile. I already have. She slid a flash drive across the table. This will override the temperature lock for exactly 6 minutes. After that, the system resets. You'll need to be inside, grab the gold, and vanish in that window. No second chances. Ricardo whistled. You make it sound easy. Elena's voice turned cold. It's not. By afternoon, the team gathered in Sergio's garage. The rain had returned, thin, relentless, whispering against the roof. The garage smelled of steel, motor oil, and sweat. Sergio stood over a stripped-down van, sparks flying from his welding torch. Timing system? Marco asked. Sergio nodded. Almost done. Reinforced suspension, hidden compartments, false plates. She'll handle the weight if the roads don't eat her alive. Ricardo circled the vehicle, admiring the modifications. Looks like something out of a war zone. That's because it is, Sergio muttered. Marco unfolded the map again, spreading it on the workbench. His finger traced the route from Turin's freight yard to the mountain tunnels north of Rivoli. This is our point of contact, he said. Tunnel 4A. Abandoned side access here. We detonate the southern maintenance gate exactly 60 seconds before the train enters. The explosion will trigger the emergency brake system. The train will stop inside the tunnel. No visibility, no external communication. We move fast. 2 minutes to breach, 3 minutes to load, 1 minute to vanish. And after that? Ricardo asked. We head west, Marco said. Secondary route through the river road. The van will blend with delivery traffic. At dawn, we dump it and split. No calls, no contact. 2 weeks later, we meet in Marseille. Sergio whistled. That's a lot of faith for people like us. Marco met his gaze. Faith isn't part of the plan. That night, Marco couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, the dim light of the city bleeding through the curtains. His apartment was silent except for the faint hum of rain on glass. On the table beside him lay the detonator, small, silver, precise. His fingers brushed against it like it was something alive. He thought of the war again. Bosnia. The way explosions had shaped his life, taking men apart, putting others together. He had promised himself he'd never build another bomb. Yet here it was, and here he was, counting seconds and wire colors like a man measuring his own heartbeat. The phone rang once. Marco let it ring twice before answering. Bellini, a voice said. It was deep, slow, the kind of voice that never smiled. Santo, Marco replied. You're in, the voice said. Good. I trust Elena told you the details. She did. Then he'll tell you the rest. There's more gold than you think, and more eyes watching. Do your part, get out clean, and you'll never have to look over your shoulder again. Marco hesitated. And if someone talks, then someone disappears, Santo said. The line went dead. Marco sat there, the phone still in his hand, listening to the echo of his own breath. He didn't trust Santo. He didn't trust anyone. But trust wasn't required, only precision. 2 days later, the team met in the industrial district, an abandoned textile warehouse. The walls were cracked, the floor littered with dust and forgotten tools. The air smelled of metal and decay. This place gives me the creeps, Ricardo muttered. Good, Marco said. Means no one else will come here. Elena set up her laptop on an old workbench, screens flickering with blue code. Sergio rolled in a crate of gear, detonators, signal jammers, cutting torches. Marco gathered them around the table. We run it again, he said. They moved like clockwork. Elena timing the lock bypass. Sergio wiring the charges. Ricardo simulating the getaway route. Every motion rehearsed, every second counted aloud. When it ended, Marco looked at his watch. 6 minutes, 52 seconds. Not good enough. Ricardo groaned. Come on, we're close. Close isn't safe, Marco said. We go again. They did, again, and again, until the air was thick with exhaustion and the faint smell of burned metal. When they finally stopped, Elena's hands trembled slightly. Well, make it, she said. We always do. Marco didn't answer. He was staring at the door, the shadow under it, the faint sound outside. He thought he saw movement. But when he opened it, the alley was empty. The next morning, Sergio found a message slipped under the garage door. No name, no signature, just 3 words written in pencil. You're being watched. He showed it to Marco. This some kind of joke? Sergio asked. Marco shook his head. No. It's a warning. From who? I don't know, Marco said. But it means someone knows. Elena arrived minutes later, pale and silent. I checked the surveillance feeds, she said. Someone's been following us. Government car, no plates, tinted windows. Same one near the cough, the bar, even the yard. Police? Ricardo asked. Elena shook her head. Worse. Private security. Probably working for whoever owns the gold. For a long time, no one spoke. The rain outside grew heavier, as if the city itself was listening. Finally, Marco said, "We keep moving. Change phones. Change routes. We're too far in to stop now." Sergio looked doubtful. "And if they know everything? Then we make them think they do," Marco said. "And we move faster than their suspicion." Elena glanced at him. "That's not strategy, Marco. That's suicide." He smiled faintly. "In my experience, they're the same thing." That night, the team dispersed, each vanishing into the fog. Marco stayed behind, sitting alone in the warehouse, his mind spinning through possibilities. He knew the feeling too well, the moment before something breaks, when everything is too perfect, too smooth. He looked down at the message again. "You're being watched." He didn't know who had written it, but he knew what it meant. Someone on the inside was already planning their own escape. And if there was one thing Marco Bellini had learned in war, it was this: betrayal never comes from strangers. Outside, the rain turned to thunder. The countdown had already begun. The night before the heist, Turin was drowning in fog. The city looked like it had been carved out of smoke, every street blurred, every shadow stretched thin by the pale glow of the lamps. The Po River moved silently beneath the bridges, black and slow, reflecting nothing. It was the kind of night that hid intentions. Marco Bellini stood at the edge of the freight yard, a cigarette between his fingers, watching the silhouettes of trains through the mist. The air was cold, the metal rails slick with dew. In the distance, he could hear the faint rumble of machinery, a reminder that time was already moving faster than they could. Sergio's van was parked behind a rusted fence, disguised among other abandoned vehicles. The engine idled softly. Inside, Ricardo checked his watch for the third time. "We're early," he muttered. "We're never early," Marco said. "We're on time." Elena sat in the back seat, eyes fixed on her laptop screen. The soft blue light flickered against her face. Her fingers moved fast, typing code, breaking layers of digital protection as if she were peeling skin from a wound. "Connection stable," she said. "Train sensors offline for 15 minutes. After that, they'll reboot automatically." "That's our window." Marco nodded. "Then let's not waste it." The plan had been rehearsed 100 times, but tonight it felt different, heavier. Not from fear, but from certainty. Each of them knew what was at stake. Not just money. Freedom. Escape. Redemption. Maybe, if such a thing still existed for people like them. At exactly 01, the rails began to hum. The sound came first, deep, metallic, like a heart beating in the dark. Then came the vibration, trembling through the soles of their boots. The gold train was approaching. Elena closed her laptop. "It's live." Marco exhaled slowly. "Positions." Sergio started the van. Ricardo gripped the wheel. Marco climbed into the back, checked the detonator one last time. The tunnel loomed ahead, black, narrow, echoing. They rolled forward, headlights off, moving like ghosts. At 06, Elena's voice cut through the silence. 200 meters. The signal's active. Marco's thumb rested on the trigger. He counted down the seconds. 3 to 1. The explosion wasn't loud. It was deep, a muffled roar that shook the ground beneath them. Dust rained from the tunnel's ceiling. The train screeched as brakes locked, sparks showering through the dark like molten rain. Metal screamed against metal. Then silence. "Go," Marco said. They moved fast, the van skidding to a halt near the side entrance. Sergio and Marco leapt out, cutting through the emergency gate with a plasma torch. Ricardo kept the engine running, eyes flicking between the tunnel mouth and the black void beyond. Inside the tunnel, the air was heavy with smoke. The gold train stood still, the beast caught mid-breath. "Car 7, Elena said, her voice steady in Marco's earpiece. "That's the vault." They sprinted down the narrow passage, boots slamming against gravel. Marco's flashlight cut through the dust. The numbers on the carriages blurred past -4, 5, 6 there. 7. Marco planted the charges along the lock seam. Sergio covered him, weapon drawn, though they both knew no one was supposed to be here. "On 3, Marco said. One to the door blew open, folding outward like paper. Heat and smoke spilled out. Inside, the glow of gold reflected off the torchlight, neat stacks of bars, precise and perfect. For a moment, even Marco froze. "Move," he said sharply. They began loading the crates, 50 kilos each. The sound of clinking metal filled the car, rhythmical and obscene. Elena's voice crackled in the earpiece. "4 minutes left." "Copy," Marco said. Sergio grunted under the weight. "Feels like carrying God himself." "Then let's not anger him," Marco muttered. Outside, Ricardo tapped the steering wheel nervously. Come on. The fog outside the tunnel swirled unnaturally. A movement. Headlights. Ricardo's eyes narrowed. Two vehicles approaching from the opposite end. Not police. No sirens. Just quiet, steady intent. He grabbed the radio. Marco, we've got company. Define company. Two SUVs. Black. No plates. Marco cursed under his breath. They're not supposed to be here. Elena broke in. Someone tipped them off. Finish loading. Marco barked. Sergio tossed another crate into the van. That's the last one. Move. They sprinted back toward the van as the first SUV entered the tunnel. Headlights cutting through the smoke. Ricardo slammed the pedal as soon as Marco's boots hit the floor. The van roared forward, tires screeching. Gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets sparked against the tunnel walls. The echo was deafening. Who the hell are they? Sergio shouted. Doesn't matter, Marco said. Drive. They burst out of the tunnel into the open night. The city lights of Turin glimmered faintly on the horizon, far away, unreachable. Ricardo swerved hard, taking the side road through the old industrial zone. The van bounced over potholes, metal crates clanging in the back. Elena braced herself, shouting over the engine. They're still behind us. Marco leaned out the window, returning fire. The SUVs closed the gap. One of them rammed the rear bumper, jolting the van sideways. Ricardo gritted his teeth. Hold on. He took a sharp turn, tires screaming. The van skidded across the wet asphalt, missing a row of concrete barriers by inches. Sparks lit the road. Sergio fired from the back, hitting one of the SUVs in the radiator. It spun out, crashing into a ditch. The second one kept coming. They won't stop. Elena yelled. They will, Marco said grimly. When we make them. He pulled a small black device from his jacket, the last charge, meant for emergencies. He twisted the cap, armed it, and threw it out the window. The explosion tore through the night. Fire and metal erupted behind them, swallowing the SUV in a bloom of orange. The shockwave hit the van like a hammer. Ricardo fought the wheel, eyes wide. We're clear. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the ragged breathing of survivors. Then Elena said quietly, they knew, Marco. Someone told them. Before we even started. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because deep down, he already knew she was right. They drove for another hour before stopping at the river docks. The fog had thinned, replaced by a soft drizzle. Marco climbed out, walked to the edge of the pier. The Po River looked calm, indifferent. Sergio opened the rear doors. The gold gleamed faintly in the dim light, stacked like silent witnesses. Ricardo stretched, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. We made it, he said, almost laughing. We actually made it. Marco turned slowly, eyes cold. No, not yet. Elena stepped forward. What do you mean? We were supposed to meet Santo after the job, Marco said. But he didn't call. No signal. Nothing. Maybe he's waiting, Sergio suggested. Maybe, Marco said softly. Or maybe he's dead. The rain grew heavier, blurring the horizon. What now? Elena asked. We hide the gold, Marco said. Split it later, once we know who's alive and who's not. No calls. No messages. We disappear. Ricardo grinned weakly. Back to being ghosts, huh? Marco looked at the dark water. We were never anything else. That night, they buried the gold in a dry storage unit beneath the old railway bridge. Only Marco and Elena knew the exact coordinates. When they sealed the door, Marco placed his hand on the cold steel, as if trying to feel the future through it. Something's wrong, Elena said quietly. It always is, he replied. As they walked away, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows across the river. A man in a black coat, holding a phone to his ear. When he spoke, his voice was low, measured. It's done, he said. They have the gold. You can move in now. He listened for a moment, then nodded. Yes, sir. Bellini doesn't suspect a thing. The man slipped the phone into his pocket and disappeared into the fog. The morning after the heist, the city woke in silence. The newspapers hadn't yet spoken, the police hadn't yet moved, and the people of Turin went about their lives as if nothing had changed. But in the underbelly of the city, in the tunnels, the warehouses, the bars that never closed, whispers were already spreading. A gold train had vanished in the fog, swallowed whole by the night. No witnesses, no survivors, just the echo of steel and smoke. Marco Bellini stood in his apartment, staring out the window as sunlight crawled reluctantly over the rooftops. He hadn't slept. The faces of the men who had died in the explosion, the SUVs, the chase still burned behind his eyes. Whoever those men were, they hadn't been police. That much he knew. They were hired guns, and someone had hired them knowing exactly where and when to strike. The coffee on the table had gone cold. He didn't drink it. His phone lay in pieces beside it, smashed the night before. No calls, no trace, that was the rule. But the silence was beginning to feel heavier than the gold they had stolen. There was a knock at the door. 1, 2, 3, slow, deliberate. Marco reached for his pistol, the weight of it familiar in his hand. "It's me," Elena's voice said softly from the other side. He opened the door just enough to see her face, pale, drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept either. "We need to talk," she said. He let her in. She dropped her bag on the floor and began pacing. "I traced the signal from last night, the interference during the chase. It didn't come from the ministry. It came from inside our own channel." "You're saying it was one of us?" Marco asked. "I'm saying someone fed them our exact coordinates. Sergio, Ricardo, Elena herself. One of them." Marco lit a cigarette, the smoke curling between them. "Where's Sergio?" "Gone," she said. "The garage was empty this morning. Tools missing. No signs of struggle. And Ricardo. Checked his apartment. Has there, but has not answering." Marco exhaled. "Then we start with him." They found Ricardo's door unlocked. The apartment smelled of gasoline and cheap perfume. The television played static. On the kitchen table lay a half-empty glass and a folded newspaper. Marco moved silently through the room, eyes sharp, every sense on alert. "Ricardo," Elena called quietly. From the back room came a noise, not a voice, not a footstep. Just a low hum, electric and irregular. Marco raised his gun, pushed the door open. Ricardo sat slumped against the wall, a phone in his hand, eyes staring at nothing. Blood had dried dark on his shirt. His breathing was shallow, barely there. "Elena," Marco said. She was beside him in seconds, checking for a pulse. "He's alive." "Barely." On the floor beside him lay a small flash drive, identical to the one Elena had used during the heist. Marco picked it up. "What is this?" Ricardo's lips moved. No sound came out. Then, faintly, he said it was insurance. "Who?" Marco demanded. "Who did this?" But Ricardo's eyes had already gone glassy. Elena pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the tremor in her voice. "He was the traitor, Marco." He was silenced. Marco pocketed the flash drive. "Then we find the one who ordered it." They drove across the city, through narrow streets and abandoned factories, until the skyline of Turin was just a blur behind them. The rain returned, soft at first, then relentless. Elena's fingers drummed against the dashboard, her mind racing faster than the car. "Who gains from this?" she said. "Who has the reach to plant surveillance, hire mercenaries, and erase their own men?" "Santo," Marco said. "It's always Santo." Elena shook her head. "No, he wouldn't burn his own operation. He needs us to move the gold." "Maybe that was never the plan," Marco said darkly. "Maybe we were just the distraction." He turned sharply off the road, onto a gravel path that led to an old warehouse by the river. It was one of Santos' known meeting points. The gates were open. No guards. No cars. They stepped inside. The smell hit first: oil, smoke, and something metallic beneath it. Blood, bodies. 3 of them, lined against the far wall. Santos' men. Their throats had been cut clean. Elena swallowed hard. Jesus. Marco crouched beside one of them, searching the pockets. A phone. No signal. A wallet. And a folded note. He opened it. "You're too late." By nightfall, the city was swarming with police. Roadblocks. Helicopters. News vans. The missing gold had become national scandal, and the Ministry of Finance was denying everything. Marco and Elena moved through the outskirts, staying in the dark, blending with the rain. They stopped at an abandoned chapel on the hill overlooking the river. Inside, the air was cold and damp, the walls cracked with old prayers. Elena lit a candle. The small flame flickered, painting her face in gold. "What now?" she asked. "We still have the gold," Marco said. "For how long? You think whoever did this will stop?" "No," he said. "That's why we end it first." He took out the flash drive from Ricardo's body, plugged it into her laptop. Lines of code appeared, followed by encrypted files, bank transfers, offshore accounts, and one name repeated again and again: Santo di Rossi. But there was another name too, one that made Elena's breath catch. "Elena Viri." She froze. "That's not possible." Marco's gaze was sharp, unreadable. "Explain." "I don't know what this is. Someone used my credentials, my ID. They're framing me." "Are they?" he asked quietly. Her voice cracked. "You think it's me?" "I think everyone lies when gold is involved." She stood, furious. "You've known me for years, Marco." "I've known soldiers who killed brothers for less," he said. The silence between them was heavier than the storm outside. The candle trembled. Finally, Elena spoke, voice breaking. "If you don't believe me, Finish it. Right here. Marco looked at her for a long time, then holstered his gun. Not yet. He turned toward the door. If you're innocent, prove it. Help me find the one who isn't. At dawn, they reached the storage unit by the railway bridge, the place where the gold was hidden. The lock was still intact, the door untouched. But as soon as Marco stepped inside, his stomach turned. Empty. Every crate. Gone. The floor was wet, the air thick with the smell of diesel. Tracks of heavy tires led out toward the riverbank. It's gone, Elena whispered. All of it. Marco stared at the emptiness where fortune had once gleamed. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched. He took it. Who? Santo. Or whoever's wearing his name now. He stepped outside. The fog over the river was lifting. Through it, he saw movement, a black car, idling near the pier. A figure standing beside it, smoking. Santo. Marco's voice was low. Stay here. He walked toward the pier, the sound of his boots echoing against the water. Santo smiled as he approached. You're late, Bellini. I was beginning to think you drowned. Where's the gold? Safe, Santo said. Safer than you'll ever be. Marco's hand hovered near his pistol. You set us up. Santo exhaled smoke. You set yourselves up. I just gave you the stage. You think this was about money? No. It was about cleaning house. Your team, all liabilities. Now the gold is back where it belongs. Marco stepped closer. You killed them all. Santo's smile widened. Not all. A gunshot cracked the air. Marco flinched, but it wasn't aimed at him. Santo staggered, eyes wide, a hole blooming red in his chest. Behind him stood Elena, gun trembling in her hands. He was lying, she said. About everything. Santo fell to his knees, then collapsed. The cigarette rolled from his fingers into the water. For a moment, the only sound was the river. Marco looked at her. You shouldn't have come. I had to, she said. You wouldn't believe me otherwise. He nodded slowly. Now what? Elena stared at the horizon. Now we disappear. For real this time. Marco turned to leave, but something caught his eye. The back seat of Santo's car. Stacked neatly inside, half covered by a tarp, were gold bars. Not all of it, but enough to start again. He looked at Elena. She looked back. Neither spoke. They loaded what they could into the van. The rest sank into the Po River, pulled down by its own weight. Hours later, on the border road toward France, the fog began to thin. The mountains rose in the distance, sharp against the morning light. Elena drove. Marco sat beside her, silent, watching the road unravel ahead. You think we'll make it? She asked. We already did, he said. She smiled faintly, eyes on the horizon. Maybe one day we'll stop running. Maybe, Marco said, but not today. Behind them, Turin disappeared into the mist, a city that swallowed gold and men alike. And somewhere beneath the river, the rest of the treasure slept in silence, waiting for the next fool brave enough to chase it. Because in Turin, nothing ever stays buried. Not gold, not betrayal, not ghosts.